Hey everyone, today we are sewing up the new Oro Rosa pattern, Tiny Cata. This is the miniature version of the very popular Catalina Crossbody bag. The finished size is 7.5 inches wide, 4.5 inches tall, and 2.5 inches deep. It has one main compartment. It has double zipper closure. You can use a wristlet strap or a crossbody strap. It has binding on the inside. It has two options for the exterior, a solid exterior or a pieced exterior. And it has been really fun to make. For today's tutorial, it's assumed that you've already cut out and interfaced your fabric per the instructions, as well as put on the markings on the back if you are doing the pieced exterior. You will need your cut fabric pieces. You will need your hardware as outlined in the pattern. And for tools, you will need ruler, pens, scissors, rotary cutter, stapler, staple remover or pliers, double-sided tape. You will need clips, a rivet punch if you're going to be setting rivets to secure your D-ring connectors, and you will also need a rivet setting tool. So let's get going. It's assumed as we start that you have all of your pattern pieces cut out, interfaced, with the stabilizer applied and marked up per the pattern instructions. The first thing that we're going to be doing is sewing up the pieced exterior panel. If you are doing a solid exterior panel, then you can skip forward through this part to where we build our packs. If you are doing the pieced exterior, what you want to do first is check that you have your 6 individual pieces, that they are marked correctly, and then double check by placing them side by side that you have all of your symbols lined up the right way, and that when you put them together, it roughly looks like a rectangle shape, with this shape being because of the seam allowance. Take your first 2 pieces, A and B, and you're going to place them right sides together with the matching symbols together at the side. The pieces have angles on the side where necessary so that it will line up perfectly and there's no overhang at your seam allowance. Clip that together, and then we're going to sew that at 3/8 of an inch. We're going to be sewing one piece on at a time, starting at A and working our way down to F. If you're confident sewing up your pieces, then you can pair them up and do A and B, C and D, E and F, sew them together, and then do your last seams. The reason that I'm starting at A and working my way through is so that there's no confusion about the correct order of the pieces. But if you feel confident in your sewing, then you can go ahead and do pairs rather than going one at a time. I'm going to take this over to the machine now and sew that first seam. You want to make sure when you're sewing this that you're taking a consistent seam allowance that is in keeping with the instructions, 3/8 of an inch, so that you have the correct size finished main panel piece when you're done piecing together your front panel. Backstitching at the beginning, and we will also backstitch at the end. Sewing straight down this side. What we'll then do is press open that seam. You can finger press or use your seam roller. And then we will be top stitching on either side of that seam using our longer stitch length. Your top stitching seam allowance is 1/8 of an inch. I like to start in the side seam allowance so that I can backstitch to keep those threads secure and it won't be seen from the front. I pivot at the bottom and then come straight down the other side so that I don't have to backstitch again at the bottom of the seam. I just backstitch at the top. I like to trim my threads as I go to keep it nice and tidy. Then take your next piece, which is your piece C. Double check that you've got the markings right and that it is the correct piece based on the length of this side seam. And you're going to place it right sides together with your pattern piece B. Again, lining up the angle at the side. And you're going to sew that also at 3/8 of an inch. Then we will fold it open the same way and top stitch down either side. And we're going to repeat that for each of the subsequent pieces, doing our checks each time to make sure our symbols are correct and the length of this seam is correct so that we get the right order for our exterior front panel pieces. Fold that open, press it down, and then we will top stitch on either side of that seam the same way as we did for the first join. For both my top stitching and my piecing, I like to have a setting on my machine so I know where the correct seam allowance is so I can stay consistent between all of my pieces. Take your next piece, piece D, double check the length, double check the symbol, line it up right sides together, matching up the angle at the top and at the bottom. Going back to your piecing seam allowance, and I use the edge of my presser foot, and I know that I have the correct 3/8 of an inch measure from that edge to my needle position so that I can sew consistently down that side. If you find that you have a circumstance like this where it's just not quite lined up, you can undo that and re-sew that seam. If it's just a small amount that will stay hidden in the seam allowance, then you can try to correct for it. When you sew this one on, to just slide it up a little bit more, I'm going to undo that and re-sew that so that it lines up properly. You can see here, I just haven't slid that up quite enough, and that's why it hasn't lined up at the bottom. Something else to consider is if you are sewing together two fabrics of different thickness, like I've got a vinyl and a cotton woven here, if you put the thinner fabric down on the feed dogs, that will help it to feed through more evenly, and you're less likely to have a mismatch at the top or the bottom of your piecing. I've re-sewn that join between piece C and piece D, and you can see it lines up a lot better now. And this is also a reason to be particularly precise when you are cutting out your pattern pieces so that when you go to piece it together, it all lines up perfectly. So now I'm going to top stitch that join. Now piece E, lining up top and bottom, checking my symbols. And as you can see, I messed up when I put my symbols on the first time. That's why our checks are good. Back to my construction stitch. Check it again. Good at the bottom. Good enough at the top. Fold that open. Top stitching stitch settings. And you can see that exterior panel is really starting to take form there. Take your last piece, line up the seams, line up the side. Don't do what I did. I ran out of bobbin thread. So what I've done here, where it ran out, I just undid a few stitches to give me long enough thread at the back to pull the top thread through and knot it off. And then I will continue again, placing my needle in the same hole. I haven't changed my needle position or my settings at all, but this is another reason to have consistent settings that you always use. Then I can manually place that needle down in the hole where my thread ends and continue straight down that side. Back stitch here like nothing happened. Go back up to where I restarted my thread and pull that top thread through. Tie that off again, and then you can snip both those threads. You can, if you want extra security, even tie those two lots of two together. This is all going to be hidden on the inside, so you don't have to worry about disguising the thread from the back. And then from the front, you can see that I've ended up back in the same line of stitches, so you can't tell that I had to sew that twice. Once you have that piece all sewn together, you can trim these little corners off and double check the panel size against your exterior panel piece that is not pieced together to check that it is the correct size and make any adjustments necessary. Now we can get organized into packs. Pack 1 is your strap and your wristlet, including the necessary hardware. Pack 2 is your 2 exterior panels and your 2 interior panels, as well as your tag if you wanted to put one on. Pack 3 is your zipper panel lining, your gusset lining, your connectors, your D-rings, as well as rivet sets, your zipper, and 2 zipper pulls. And pack 4 is your 2 pieces of bias tape. The first thing that we're going to do is prepare our wristlet strap. If you're not making a wristlet, then you can skip forward to step 4. Take your cut piece for your wristlet strap and your ruler. And you're going to draw a line down the center on the wrong side. Take your double-sided tape and you're going to place a strip straight down the center. Fold the long raw edge of your wristlet strap towards that center line, lining it up all the way along, starting at the middle and working your way out to both ends so that you can maintain as flat of a strap as you can without any twists. Making sure you're folding it straight over to meet that line. Repeat from the other side so that the 2 long raw edges join in the middle. My double-sided tape went a little askew here at the end, so I'm just going to add an extra little piece to fold that end bit over. Now fold the folded long edge over to meet the other folded long edge and place clips along that open side. The raw edges of your strap are now hidden in the middle. We're sewing down just the open side of this wristlet strap. If you have a walking foot, you may find that that is a better choice of presser foot than a Teflon foot to avoid any twisting in your strap. Because this is just a short length, I'm going to stick with my Teflon foot, but when I sew the crossbody strap, I will be changing over to my walking foot. You may need to increase your tension slightly because we are sewing through quite a lot of layers. So I've started at the end here, and I'm going to pivot and sew across the end here, and then I will take long tails and pull those through and enclose them inside of my wristlet strap, since this will be the exposed end of the strap. You can sew down both sides of your strap if you like. Once that's sewn, you can trim your threads and straighten up the end of your strap if it is not quite lined up. And if you have any twisting, you can choose to put some weight on that strap to help it flatten out before you secure your D-ring. One raw edge of this strap will be exposed, so you can choose to edge coat that if you like, or you can leave it raw or color it in with a Sharpie. Take the end of your strap that you want to have as the exposed end and put it through your swivel. Have it poke out about an inch. Take the other raw end and fold it up to meet where that swivel hook is. And then we're going to fold the shorter piece over, and we're going to punch a hole here to place our rivet. I like to use a clip just to hold those layers together. Make sure that they're lined up neatly, and then punch your hole. You can measure this if you like. I tend to just cross my fingers. But you want to make sure that you're not punching through any of your top stitching. Take a rivet and cap. If you find that your rivet is not quite poking through enough, you may need to switch to a longer stem, a longer post. And I also like to make sure that where I've punched, it's come through in the center. This one is slightly off, so I'm just going to move that over ever so slightly, and it'll just make a slightly larger hole, but it will be hidden under the cap. You can also compress this vinyl down with key fob pliers to help it stay a little flatter for installing that rivet through the multiple layers. Then go and set that rivet, making sure that you feel the 2 clicks as the stem compresses within the cap. Set that aside, and now we can work on our crossbody strap. Retrieve your crossbody strap, and we're going to draw a line straight down the middle. On my strap, I've also applied a strip of interfacing because my vinyl is kind of stretchy and I don't want it to stretch through use of the bag. Take your double-sided tape and you're going to apply a strip of double-sided tape on either side of that center line. This is a 3-inch wide strap, so your center line is 1.5 inches from the long end. Working from the center, we're going to be folding the long edge in to meet that center line. We're going to leave a very small gap when we fold both sides together of about 1/16 of an inch. That will help when we have to fold over the final fold. When you're folding your strap, it's important to make sure that you are folding straight across without any twists in your strap so that you don't have a wavy strap when you finish sewing. And fold the strap again, meeting up the 2 folded edges, and then clip along that open edge to create a 3/4 of an inch wide strap. We're now going to sew around this entire strap. I recommend using a walking foot if you have one for your machine. If you don't have a walking foot, then sew down one side. I like to start with the open side first, finish your stitches, and then sew again from top to bottom the same direction down the closed side to reduce any twisting in your strap. If you're using a walking foot, you want to make sure that your strap does not catch on the feed on the walking foot itself when you start sewing. Use a longer stitch length and back stitch at the end of your strap that will be hidden under your strap end. I find when I am sewing vinyl straps, I need to increase my tension to account for the greater number of layers. Check your stitches on the front and the back after the first few inches to make sure that your tension is nicely balanced on top and bottom. You don't want to pull or push on your strap, let the machine feed it through, and I like to use part of my presser foot so that I get a nice consistent 1/8 of an inch seam allowance as I go all the way around my strap. Trim your threads and retrieve your hardware. I like to start by putting my strap through my slider. If you have a preferred side of your strap, put the top up, feed it through, over your slider, and then you're going to come back around, and before we rivet that in place, we're going to place our strap end on that side. If your strap end has a front and a back, you're going to have the front on the same side as your slider is. If you have a clamp on strap end, you're just going to clamp that straight on. And I also like to put a couple of drops of Loctite on my screws so that they stay nice and secure. Just pushing on the flat part of that strap end to make sure that it's going on straight. When you're happy, fold that end of your strap over, and we're going to place a rivet below the slider to secure the end of the strap. You can put 1 or 2 rivets in place there. Going to grab a clip to hold the layers together and punch a hole. I generally prefer to do 2 rivets on my straps. That is up to you how you would like to do it. You can measure the center of that strap. That would be 3/8 of an inch from the outside edge, or you can just eyeball it. Make sure that you have enough distance from your strap end and your slider to be able to place and set your rivet. Then set those 2 rivets in place. Once they're set, take the other end of your strap and fold it up around so that it's going to be enclosing this strap end. And you're going to feed on one of your swivel clasps. You want to feed it so that the hook is facing to the outside. So you have slider, folded over strap end, comes all the way around. Make sure there's no twists. Then you're going to feed it through the bottom here. Over that fold, straight up. Slide on the second slider, making sure that it's again facing the outside. Put on your second strap end. You want the back of the strap end to be where the bar of your swivel is. And then slide your swivel back up, fold over the other end, and punch the holes for and place your rivet or rivets at this end also. And then set those rivets. I will put links to my videos with a more detailed explanation of both a fabric crossbody strap and a vinyl crossbody strap, as well as doing the wristlet with no raw ends, in case you wanted to look at any of those. Set those aside for now and move on to pack 2. Take your 2 exterior panels and your 2 lining panels, and if you're going to apply a tag, go ahead and do that now, either to your exterior or your lining, whichever way you wish to do it. Take your clips and your exterior and lining main panels and pair them up wrong sides together. We're then going to clip around the edges before we baste those in place, lining them up as best as you can. We're then going to baste around those pieces at 1/8 of an inch. I like to baste mine with the lining side down, as that is my thinner material and that will help it to feed through properly. And when we're done, we will check the size of these finished pieces against the original pattern piece. Once you've basted your exteriors to your linings, check with your pattern piece if there is any excess hanging off the edge and trim that using your rotary cutter so that you have the correct size for both of your main panel pieces. Then set those aside and retrieve your pack 3. Take your 2 lining panels and your 2 exterior panels for your zipper, as well as your 9-inch zipper tape. The first thing that we're going to do is baste the lining piece to the back of your zipper. So placing the zipper wrong side together with the right side of your lining, line up the edges and clip that in place. Your zipper tape should be the same length as your zipper panel lining. We're then going to baste these 2 together at 1/8 of an inch. Lining side down to the feed dogs. Take your exterior zipper panel and line that up right sides together with the right side of your zipper tape, the side that has the teeth sticking up. Lining up the ends of your exterior zipper panel with the lining and clipping along the length, making sure that they all are lined up at the edge, the lining, the zipper tape, and your exterior vinyl. We're then going to switch over to a narrow foot. I will use my narrow zipper foot and sew along this edge of the zipper at 3/8 of an inch. The wrong side of the zipper panel, the zipper teeth facing the right side up to the right side of that panel, and then below that, the lining piece, right sides together with the wrong side of the zipper tape. I like to move that first clip around to the other side when I get going to keep that zipper tape in position, making sure that you have the correct seam allowance. You can even draw a line at 3/8 of an inch on the back of that zipper panel to make sure that you're getting a nice straight zipper install. Double check your needle placement with a ruler if you need to make sure that it's going to hit at the right spot. And I like to make sure that I have a visual guide, mine will be the edge of my zipper foot with the needle positioned appropriately to get me the right seam allowance. You can even drop the needle down in that first spot and double check it with your ruler. And because we're going to be folding it over, you want a scant seam allowance to account for where you're going to be folding that zipper panel. You can backstitch using a shorter stitch length and sew straight down the long edge. Fold that open and press that in place. Then we will top stitch along the edge of that zipper at 1/8 of an inch. You can use clips to keep those layers lined up. And in order to keep those layers lined up, I also actually like to sew around the open edge of that zipper panel, as well as top stitching next to the zipper teeth. I find applying a slight amount of pressure on the exterior vinyl there just pulls that fold a little flatter. And then just basting down this other side. And then repeat that process for the other side. Again, basting the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the lining first at 1/8 of an inch, and then clipping the exterior right sides together with your zipper tape, sewing that also, folding it open, and top stitching. Fold that open, and before I top stitch, I just like to check that I am happy with the spacing on either side of my zipper teeth. And if I need to, I can adjust this stitch line here to get a more even spacing. Press it in place, and in the same way as we did on this one, top stitching along this edge and basting the lining of the zipper gusset all around the other three sides. Take your zipper pulls and we're going to put them onto our zipper here. You can apply your zipper pulls however you usually like to do it, be that using a zipper jig, however it is you like to do it. The important thing, regardless of whichever way you do it, is to take a look at your zipper tape and see which tooth is sticking further out. And that tooth will need to still be further out after you put your zipper pull on. Otherwise, the end of your zipper gusset is not going to line up. And I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean. So this tooth on the right-hand side is sticking further out. So that's the way that I should put my pull on, starting on that side, tucking the other side in. I like to slide it down till they meet and then push from the back of the zipper. And as you can see, I've kept that tooth at the outermost point, and when I slide it down, it remains the same and even. However, if I do it the other way, with this tooth starting first, slide my pull on, slide that up, oh, it doesn't even want to go on this way because it's wrong. Slide it on, and you can see now the tooth on the left is further out. When I slide it up, you're going to get this bubble in your zipper, and worse yet, when you slide it all the way to the other end, now the ends of your zipper panel are no longer lined up. So it is important to check which tooth is further out so that you can get your zipper pull on the right way to keep your zipper panel both lined up and without any bubbles in your zipper tape. So it's a really good idea just to check that and then correct it so that you have the correct side remaining further out so that you have an even zipper panel with no bubbles. If you do get it wrong, you can correct it. You can see that it is back to being lined up and then start over. Something else that is helpful is to just melt the ends of your zipper with a lighter so that you don't get any fraying when you're putting on your zipper pulls. I do have a detailed video on applying your zipper pulls without any aids, but also giving little tips about the teeth placement that you may find useful. Slide your pulls to the middle. Check that it's nice and even, there's no bubbles, and set that aside for the moment. Take your connector pieces and your D-rings, and we're going to draw a line down the center of these connectors, and then fold the long edges into the middle. I'm going to place a strip of double-sided tape, fold the edges into that line, and then we can press that in place with a seam roller or with our iron. And then we will top stitch around the connector at 1/8 of an inch. Grab your connector, you can slide that on, and you can clip that to keep that secure, or you can baste at the end of that connector. I like to baste mine at 3/8 of an inch so that I have an easy guide for when I am attaching it to my zipper gusset. Take your 2 connector pieces and your completed zipper panel, and you're going to place the connector in the center over that zipper, hanging over by 3/8 of an inch, and that should sit right around the center of your zipper tape. You can clip that in place, and then we are going to baste that connector to the zipper panel at 1/8 of an inch. Double check that your pulls are installed at this point. And then sew your basting stitches just along the end of that connector. Take your 2 remaining gusset pieces and your zipper panel and position your zipper panel so that it is lining side down on the gusset lining, lining up the edges. Your gusset lining will be slightly wider than your zipper panel. That is on purpose, so just center it up so that there's even spacing on either side. You won't need to trim this down. You can baste that lining in place if you wish, or you can sandwich this right now, putting the right side of the exterior, right sides together with the zipper panel to create a zipper panel sandwich, making sure that all of your edges are nicely lined up. So you have exterior, right sides together with the exterior of your zipper panel, the lining of the zipper panel, right sides together with your gusset lining piece. And we're going to sew along this edge through all of those layers at 3/8 of an inch. Because we have the connector here, you may need your hump jumper to help you get past that bulk. As you come down off this connector, that is a common place to get a skipped stitch. So I recommend using your hump jumper to catch your presser foot as you come off this side. If you don't have a hump jumper, then you can use a ruler, you can use a button, you can use a folded up piece of vinyl, just so that it doesn't jump down off that bulk there and cause you to skip that stitch. Again, moving my clip from here around to the side, making sure everything is lined up, using a shorter stitch length and sewing at 3/8 of an inch. And I have my hump jumper here to help when I get to that connector. And I've got my D-ring here pulled up out of the way. Back stitching. Slide my hump jumper under the presser foot as I come up to the bulk. Take it nice and slowly. And then as I come off the bulk, I'm going to put my hump jumper at the front to catch it as it comes off, taking care of the needle. It still skipped a couple of stitches there. That's okay. We're going to go back. So because I saw that it skipped those stitches, I'm going to flip this around and come back up the other way, sewing at the same spot. Hump jumper here again. I did a bit better that time. And then check, make sure that you have no skip stitches and that you are happy with that tension. Trim your threads and trim back the seam allowance of the lining only. Then we will fold this open. And what we're now going to do is top stitch along this seam. If you have a bulky connector there and your machine struggles with the layers, then you can hammer that or press it with key fob pliers to help it press down. And use your hump jumper to help you, again, with getting over that bulk, coming across this edge. And as I come up to this connector piece, using my hump jumper and just taking it nice and slowly so I don't skip any stitches on this top stitch. Be very careful of that needle. And if you do notice the loop that forms when you skip a stitch, pause and go back manually to correct that stitch. It'll be easier to correct it before you go on any further than it will be to go and manually place the stitch when you're finished. Take your ruler and we're going to mark placement for a rivet here. You want it to be centered and 1/4 of an inch down from the fold line. And you're going to be punching through the exterior, the connector piece, and the lining. And you want that rivet to be centered below your connector. And then set that rivet in place. We now need to attach the gusset pieces to this side of the zipper. You're going to take the right side of the exterior gusset and line it up with the exterior of the zipper panel at the other end and clip that in place. This creates a loop of the exterior. You're then going to do the same thing for the lining. Lining up all of those raw edges and the sides. And it will look like this at this point. We're then going to sew this edge at 3/8 of an inch, the same way as we did the other side, taking care of that connector piece and the bulk. And if you need to, you can go back over that another time to secure all of your layers. Once that seam is sewn, we're again going to trim back just the lining layer of that lower gusset piece. We're then going to fold those two pieces out to create a circle. Double check that there are no twists anywhere. It should be a ring, a loop, and then we are going to top stitch this part here. Compress that down. Again, you can use key fob pliers or a hammer to compress that seam if you need to. I like to put some clips at the sides here just to hold that in place. And then we're going to top stitch along this edge. And then place a rivet in the center below that connector, the same as we did on the first side. What we're now going to do is sew around this entire circle to baste the layers of the gusset together, the same way as I did at the top here, but this time going around the entire circle. I recommend when you're doing this to sew with the lining side down so that it feeds together as evenly as possible, or use a walking foot. Clips will be useful to hold your layers in place, and if you have a removable bed on your machine, then that will also be useful for getting the loop sewn. Take your two main panels and your gusset piece, and we're going to mark the centers. Lining up the side seams on your gusset circle, mark the center top and the center bottom. I like to take a small snip, about a 1/16 of an inch, just within the seam allowance. Then line up those center markings and put the markings at the side. The side markings are not at the level of the end of the zipper. I like to double check that they line up. And that looks good. And then mark the centers of both of these panels. Lining up the curves. Take your stapler, your clips, and your pliers, and we're going to start applying the main panels to our gusset circle. Turn your gusset circle so that it is right sides in, with the lining facing the outside, and take one of your main panels. It doesn't matter which one you start with. Checking the orientation, you want to have the top of your panel lining up with the top of your zipper gusset. Line up the center marks and place clips along the straight edge. Repeat for the bottom, again lining up the marks that we made at the center. Double check that that panel piece is facing the right way up, and we're then going to staple baste this gusset. Take your stapler, you're going to staple about 1/8 of an inch in, staying within the seam allowance where those marks are at the center top and the center bottom. Line up the side centers. I like to place clips first to make sure my placement is correct, and then slide the clips out of the way to place the first staple. With those center staples in place, we're going to clip the rest of the gusset together. You can take your scissors and just put small snips at the curve in the gusset piece so that they ease around the corners. My snips are just about 1/8 of an inch, just at the curve about every 1/4 of an inch. And that will help that gusset to fan out to meet the curve of the panel. Place your clips. Do the same for the other 3 corners. Where you have the slightly offset join between the zipper part of the gusset and the lower part, just gradually curve that around so that the zipper gusset passes across the gap. What we're now going to do is staple baste around this entire edge as well. I like to just move 1 clip at a time, place a staple, check that the prongs of your staples flatten down, and continue the whole way around. Just switching from my mini stapler to my full-size stapler because I don't like the way these staples are sitting. Before you start, make sure that the prongs are all flattened down so you don't damage the bed of your machine. And then we're going to sew around this entire gusset. Sew around using a basting stitch at 1/4 of an inch, making sure not to sew into any of your staples. You should probably be wearing safety glasses. Something else to be careful of with the staples is that sometimes the prongs stand up a little and scratch the underside of your presser foot. So just keep something handy to flatten those out if you need to. Come back to where you started. Check that all of your corners are lined up properly, and then we can remove all of those staples. Tidy up any loose threads and retrieve one of your lengths of bias tape. We're going to open it up and fold over one end about 1 inch. And then working from the center bottom of your gusset, you're going to start securing your bias tape. Consider how you're going to sew this onto your machine to determine if you're going to start going this way or this way. Start in the center. I like to place a clip first, and then we will be staple basting this bias tape all around the outside of our bag. The raw edge at the lower side of our main bag body, place a staple, make sure the prongs are folded down, and we're going to staple the entire way around the gusset. I like to use a clip to get my placement and then place a staple between the clips. And as we come up to the curve, I like to put little teeny tiny snips, the same way as we did when we curved the gusset around the main body. We will do that with our bias tape. Making sure that the edges are well lined up, particularly at that corner where it will tend to want to pull away a bit. And then flatten all of those prongs down. You have a lot of excess bias tape here. Trim it down to be about 1 inch long. So you have about 1 inch of overlap there. And then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this around the entire edge. You may find it easier to sew with the bias tape side down so that when you're sewing the curve around here, the positioning on your machine makes it easier to navigate the rounded shape. I prefer to sew with my bias tape up on my machine, and that is so I can see that the edges are remaining nicely lined up. So you can experiment with how you like to do it on your machine. That is how I prefer to do it, but if you want to sew inside the curve, you may find that that is easier for you. I'm going to be basting again at 1/4 inch. I have handy my stiletto, hump jumper, and a pair of pliers as I go around to make sure I can flatten staples as I need to. If my layers start to pull away, I can pull them out with the pliers or use my stiletto to hold them in place as they go under the feed dog and my hump jumper for any bulk. I'm using a narrow foot to make it easier to get around the edge. And come back to where we started. Go ahead and remove all of those staples. Double check for the hidden staple that may be under your overlap. And we're then going to fold our bias tape over and clip it in place. I like to pull it out first. Check for any stray threads. And then you're going to fold it on the crease line. Around the raw edge. And then use your clips to hold that in place. Pay special attention around the curves to make sure that you've got that binding positioned correctly. There will be a little bit of excess in the curve, so just smooth that out as best you can. When you're happy with all of that positioning, we're going to sew that binding in place at 3/8 of an inch, and this time I will be sewing on the inside of the curve. Something to consider when you're sewing your binding down is the color of the thread that you use. I like to use a thread that will blend in with my exterior so that if any stitches show, it is not too obvious from the outside. Even if that thread would be seen on the inside, if my bias tape is not the same color, ideally your bias tape color will coordinate with your exterior. But if not, and you have to choose between contrasting thread on your binding or being seen from the outside, I would always have the color that will be less obvious from the outside of the bag. Consider that where your bias tape overlaps, you may have quite a bit of bulk. Keep an even seam allowance the whole way around using a shorter stitch length. Comp jumper if you need it, and just take your time. A stiletto can also help to keep your bias tape where you need it to be. And we're sewing at 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Check your binding from both sides, and if there are any places that you're not quite happy with how your line of stitches looks, then you can just go over that particular area, trim your threads, and then I like to turn that side of the bag out to make sure that it looks good before I move on to the other side. Before we start the other side, an important thing to consider is that you will want to have your zipper open for two reasons. One, the second side is a little harder to sew, and I find that it is easier if you have the zipper open. You get a little more maneuverability in your bag. And two, because you will need to turn your bag out through that opening. Poke the corners out of the first side. Roll the binding. Places that you may notice some irregularities or imperfections in your binding stitches are around the curves and around the bulkier areas. Those are parts that I particularly like to look at. But if you're happy with how the first side looks, then we can start working on the second side. We'll be doing that the same way as we did the first side. Open up your zipper. Take your panel, make sure it is facing the right way up with the upper part of your panel facing the zipper part of your gusset. Line up the centers. Place your staples in the center points, making sure the prongs are flattened down. Clip around the entire edge, making those tiny snips in the gusset to help you work around the curve. Repeat for all four corners. When you've clipped around the entire edge, we're going to also staple baste within the seam allowance at about 1/8 of an inch. That all of the prongs are squished down flat so that they don't cause any troubles over at your machine, and then sew around the gusset, basting all of those layers together at 1/4 of an inch. Once you've sewn all of those layers together, remove those staples, trim your threads. Take your other length of bias tape, fold it over an inch again, and then clip it to the bottom of your bag. I clip it to the gusset side. I'm going to put one staple there at the beginning. Stapling at 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to staple baste this bias tape all the way around, putting small snips within the seam allowance, only about 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch, where it goes around the curve. Clip, then staple in place all the way around. Trim any excess to leave about 1 inch of overlap at the end of your bias tape, and flatten down all the prongs of those staples. And then sew around the entire bias tape at 1/4 of an inch. Once that's sewn, remove all of those staples. And fold over that bias tape around the raw edge of the main panel. And when you're happy with the way that has been clipped into place, you're going to sew around the second side of the bias tape, sewing with the open side up on the main panel piece all the way around using your shorter stitch length at 3/8 of an inch. When you finish sewing around that second side, take a look at your stitches again and make sure that you're happy that you have consistent seam allowance all the way. And then you can turn it out through the zipper opening. Push on your binding, roll out those seams to really get it to take shape. You can grab your crossbody strap, your wristlet strap, attach it to your bag, and you are finished. That is your completed Tiny Cata. You can use it as a wristlet, you can use it as a crossbody, and this is a really great pattern to practice your binding. Make sure that you're mindful of your materials if you're working on a domestic machine. This was a really fun, fairly quick pattern. It might get you out of a sewing funk. You can practice some of your binding skills. Get creative with the front panel. I think that Alexis really knocked this one out of the park. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.